What y'all listening to?
Limelight Highlight Podcast.
Welcome back to the show, your positive podcast, safe space, and great place for positive outlook on life. Let's get right into it. The updates, as we do every week. I was fortunate enough to fly out to Philadelphia last week, which is why this episode is coming to you just a day late. I went to visit my niece who was just recently born, and boy, she is such a gem. A little bundle of joy there. Another reason why I'm excited to be moving back in a couple years is because of just families getting bigger. You know, they're expanding. My wife and I, we just want to be there. We want to be a part of all those milestones and growing up that's going on. So, but anyway, this past Saturday, I was able to help volunteer for the Block Gives Back's Feed the Block event, as they do every Saturday. And as I mentioned on the last episode, they were pushing just under 4,000 meals served. And this weekend, they did it. Over 110 meals served, which puts them past 4,000 meals served. And yeah, that's a pretty big deal if you ask me. I helped pick up and give out 99 produce boxes that had milk, eggs, produce, cheese, yogurt, lunch meat, and some other goodies for those in need. Overall, it was a really fun and very quick event, surprisingly. It's my actually first Feed the Block event, even though they've been doing it for weeks. I actually had the opportunity to be there. It felt really good. It happened, and I don't know, people started lining up before we even started handing out the stuff. And we were all done within like 40 minutes of starting, which I think is a huge success. The produce boxes were given by Sharing Excess. Last week I made the mistake of calling them Sharing Express, which is obviously wrong, so I apologize for that. But regardless, it was a good amount of people coming together to get everything done, and it worked out perfectly. The Block Is Back has an annual event every year that they do at the end of the year, and it's called the End of the Year John. The End of the Year John is a give back for those of us that are less fortunate. And this is the 5th year that they'll be having this event, and it will be on December 12th at 1 p.m. at 16th Street and JFK Boulevard. They'll have catered food. They'll be handing out 350 tote bags filled with everyday essentials. And Candle Sweet Candle is sponsoring the event and teaming up with the Block Gives Back to raise funds for that event. So if you love deliciously scented candles, be sure to check out Candle Sweet Candle and pre-order your TBGB, the Block Gives Back candle today. They come in 3 different scents: apple maple bourbon, blueberry pie, and cinnamon bun, and they all smell so good. Trust me, I was there Saturday. I smelled each one for myself. They're really good candles. Each candle is $25, and all the profits will be donated toward the End of the Year John event. And they set a goal of 50 candles, but I'm pretty sure I've heard through the grapevine that these candles were such a hit that they've gotten more orders than that. Regardless, the candles are 100% soy, have quality fragrances, they have no dyes, and they are hand poured in Philadelphia. So go check out the show notes for the links to their page and see how you can order your candle today. Supplies are limited, and the deadline for a candle is November 1st, so put your order in ASAP. Now, if you want to help out in a different way, the Block Gives Back has a few donation requests for their End of the Year John, and those items that are needed for those tote bags would consist of women's hygiene products, bars of soap, hand sanitizer, socks, hats, gloves, chapsticks, deodorants, lotions, anything else that can keep people warm, and as long as it fits in a tote bag. The East Coast gets cold around these times, and this is when people need this type of stuff the most. So don't forget, November 1st, the deadline for candles, and the End of the Year John is December 12th. So lock it in your calendar. Now, today's unrelated fun fact is actually going to come from our guest today, our guest/host. It's about giraffes, and I had to fact check it like I do all my fun facts. And while it's not 100% true, because scientists recently found out that giraffes actually do make a humming sound, it's a very faint humming sound and not distinct, but still pretty interesting fact nonetheless. So be sure to keep an ear out throughout this episode for that. Now, for this week's episode of the podcast is just a bit different than other episodes. Today's guest is actually playing host, as I said before, and has a list of questions addressing the state of the Limelight highlight, as we touch on who I am as a person, why I do what I do, what this podcast is all about, what it stands for, We talk about numerous things throughout this episode, and this time I was the one answering questions. So I don't want to feed you any more spoilers for this episode, so let's just get into it. Help me welcome a prior guest, Vice President of the Block is back, a very close and dear friend of mine, Hakeem Ruiz, to the show once again. All right, now we got Hakeem, prior guest and new host of this episode specifically.
Part-time co-host.
We're doing a State of the Union or State of the Limelight highlight, as you say, or as you called it, and just kind of touch base and get into a bunch of different things. Go ahead. You're the host today.
Yeah, so we're going to flip the script a little bit today. For everyone who's used to hearing John speak on, positivity and also speak to other people about what they do, we're going to find out why John is the one doing this, what the mission behind this is, the purposes behind, the motivation behind all the limelight that he's shedding. So, with that said, are you ready to get into it? You ready to flip the script a little bit?
Let's do it. All right.
You got the good mic. Just want to put that out there. All right, so I want to start it off with basic information where people probably can, look in the description and find it, or, backtrack on your Instagram and maybe figure the answers to these questions out. But some aren't willing to do that, and also some want to hear it from you in your own words rather than just something that was, that they could find to read a short snippet or whatever. So I want to start off by asking you, what do you think is your biggest accomplishment so far of being the host of the Limelight Highlight podcast? What is something that stood out to you that you felt like really was significant to this point?
At this point in the podcasting game, in the positive news space, honestly, from the podcast with Shantae, talking about
Shantae Douglas,
the writer. Yes, the writer of ABC, the Adventures of Echo Boy and ABC Girl. She, at the end of her podcast episode, she talked about the guy, Matthew Rushin, and his case, who is the autistic black man who was in a car accident, and now he's serving up to 50 years in prison. I, in my expansion of constantly listening to podcasts, have fallen upon Wrongful Convictions, which is a podcast of exactly that.
Which you suggested that I subscribe to. I'm going to listen to that on the plane.
Yeah, so Wrongful Convictions is pretty much the Innocence Project. If people aren't familiar with that, it's just a organization that gets the evidence or reviews certain cases to help those who are wrongfully convicted and overturns their cases.
As seen in the movie Just Mercy, which is really big nowadays.
See, I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, it's a really big part of it. They speak all about Michael B. Jordan's character. I believe he worked for the Innocence Project and was trying a bunch of people's cases who were on death row. If I'm not mistaken, I've seen the movie recently. Very good movie. But carry on. This is like a really hot topic in today's 2020 climate because of, so much wrongful convictions that are out there.
Yeah, especially in today's climate. So I just suggested to her, hey, I know about the Innocence Project. I gave her the contact information. And this was back after the Block event in July.
Block the School,
correct. And just last 2 weeks ago, I think, right now, it is September. This episode will be released a little later on, but she messaged me saying that the Innocence Project has actually officially gotten involved in Matthew Rushin's case. And even though I wasn't directly involved, just that little piece of information alone, I would say, is one of the, for lack of a better term, highlights of my podcasting experience. I'd say that was maybe one of the most successful things I put my hat on.
So to put the limelight back onto that situation, which obviously is bigger than you, but do you think, you can maybe potentially continue to be involved in, as well as, do you think there'll be an opportunity for some of the audio that we heard on the podcast to be a part of this whole thing? Do you see, the potential that you can really start to dive into people's personal matters a little more, maybe, and find this positive light to shed on it, to where you can take it to more than just, information purposes, but actually more effective, like an
activism,
hands-on, somewhat of an activism role with the podcast?
I'd like to. I think there's sometimes there's too much going on in the world, where everybody wants to be outraged about a bunch of different things, but nobody wants to focus on one thing. And I wouldn't say that's a downfall of this podcast, but I think it's one of the things that is special to this podcast is we don't focus on one genre or one area of things. Like I said it in previous podcasts, I can't find a positive podcast space that's dedicated to just positive news. It's always news, whether it's political, whether it's, cultural or environmental, stuff like that, but there's nothing focused on positive news. And I'd like to get into activism, but there's just so much I wouldn't really know what to dive into completely. But I definitely would love to be involved in furthering helping people when I have them on. Like in this case, if it's Shantae and Matthew's case, I'd love to be more involved and see what I can do with, whatever it might be.
Can you promise your listeners that you would, when given an update, if some at all, are you going to be able to keep us in the loop with it? Are you going to keep up?
100%. I think, like you said, the first question you asked me, what's one of the biggest things what is it? Accomplishments. Yeah. And I think even if it's indirectly, I don't know the outcome of his case, but the fact that small piece of information might change his life and I'm sure his family's life. I would say that right there is something I will always try to be a part of, as far as getting updates to see how the case is going, or the notifications of whatever newsworthy things that are going on in that person's life.
Right. I think people definitely will see it like a grassroots campaign started here in a sense. But it can really grow from here. And we, as a listener, I definitely want to be in tune with that situation 100%. Hopefully we can seek some justice for that young man. Now, moving forward, I asked you your biggest accomplishments. So, seeing as you've been around for a little while, obviously you have some time to gain accomplishments. Now, for the people who maybe haven't been here as a subscriber since day one, how long have you been around for? How long has the Limelight Highlight podcast been around for?
This past February would be 2 years, so we're about 2.5 years, a little over 2.5 years now. It's been for those who've listened from day one. It's you can see the growth, not only in production, I would hope, but following as well. We're averaging. I remember I was excited about 20 followers or 20 not subscribers, but downloads per week. And now we're up to ranging a little over 100 downloads per week. And it's just that growth. Like, man, I'm not getting the interaction that I would like with some of the listeners, but the fact that I know that there's that many people actually downloading and listening to the podcast on different platforms and different devices, I'd say is big enough growth.
So with those 100 downloads you have, and you said you're not exactly getting the interaction you want with the listeners, they're all listening. How would you prefer to be, have dialogue with your followers and listeners, supporters, and whatnot?
Well, at the end of every podcast, I always say, if you have something you'd like to share, or a good news story that you've either been a part of or witnessed, like no matter how, I always want to stress, no matter how insignificant you might think it is. The smallest drop can make the biggest ripples. And I mean, to go, constantly harp back on the Shantae Douglas episode, that one bit of information with the Innocence Project could possibly potentially make such a big ripple that it changes the outcome of this guy's case. And, so I always ask, like, if there's anything you witnessed, been a part of, or something you've even read that you want to share with the audience, if it's good news or something that even is remotely close to good news, hit me up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, send me an email, stuff like that. And always rate the podcast, because that's how. Yes,
people, as a avid listener myself, the ratings, the comments, they go a long way. So whatever platform you listen to, and what is your main, do you get that information? Do you know what your main listenable platform is?
Yeah, right now everybody uses iPhones, and Apple is just dominating the podcast market. But right now, Spotify, especially with that Joe Rogan deal, going on has been really creeping up.